Hi, I'm Jack, and welcome back because I'm going to give you guys a non-spoiler review for Marvel's Eternals. The newest installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is directed by Chloé Zhao, and it stars Gemma Chan, Richard Madden, Kumail Nanjiani, Angelina Jolie, and Brian Tyree Henry, and many more in this movie. And before we get started, don't forget to follow me on social media. My username is down below at the bottom of the screen and in the description below, so don't forget to do that while you're at it. And like I said before, this is a non-spoiler review, so if you haven't seen this movie yet, you are absolutely okay. And with that out of the way, let's start talking about Eternals. The film follows a group of immortals known as the Eternals, and they are sent to Earth on a mission to destroy an alien race known as the Deviants and protect humanity on Earth. However, they've been disbanded for centuries, and they must reunite for the first time in millennia to protect the world from the Deviants once again. So this was one of my most anticipated movies of the year. If you don't know that, or if you don't know me, this was definitely one of them. I was really looking forward to this movie. I liked what I saw from the trailers. It looked unique. I really liked Chloé Zhao's movie Nomadland, where she won Best Director and also won Best Picture for. And I love the cast that's assembled in this movie. So I was really looking forward to seeing a different kind of MCU movie. And does it live up to the hype? We'll see about that. And so I can get started, let me start talking about the positives. First things first, this is easily the best looking Marvel movie in the MCU. I loved movies like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Doctor Strange and Avengers Infinity War and all that. Very fantastic looking MCU movies, and Eternals easily takes that top spot. It has phenomenal cinematography work, and the visuals look gorgeous, and it's amazing. And I saw this in IMAX, and they just blew me away. It looked so cinematic, and it just looked absolutely fantastic. Every single visual shot looks colorful. For the most part, there are some grayish looking scenes, but not too much. It's very color. It has a lot of great colors to it, especially for like red and yellow and green. It's a really good looking movie, and it's fantastic, and it's very gorgeous to look at. The second thing I really liked about this movie is the acting. I really liked the cast in the movie. I really liked Gemma Chan as Cersei. She played Minerva in Captain Marvel, and so it was really great to see her play like a leading character in this movie, because she is indeed the main character of this story. While there are 10 Eternals, she is the main focus. She's the main focus of this movie. Everything in this story and all that sort of revolves around her in a sense, and she did a great job. And I also really liked Richard Madden as Icarus, one of my favorite characters in this movie. Fantastic. I really liked him in movies like Rocket Man, and I really liked seeing him in the MCU as this character. The stuff they do with him is just great. It worked really well. I loved his dynamic with Cersei, who is also played by Gemma Chan, and really great stuff. Just definitely something I really liked in this movie. I really liked seeing him in action, and he was just the best choice for this role. I could not have picked anyone else besides him. And Angelina Jolie and Salma Hayek are both really great as well. And it was interesting to see them in an MCU movie like this, and I really liked both of them as Thena and Ajak. Thena was awesome. She was fierce. She was a really good fighter, and I really liked her scenes with Don Lee's Gilgamesh. They have a really nice friendship in there, and I really dug that, and they sold it so well. And Salma Hayek as Ajak is basically the spiritual leader of the Eternals, and I really liked her. You could see how she's such an important member of the Eternals, and she's just really great and really nice to see. Salma Hayek is fantastic, and once again, she delivers another good performance in this movie. And also others I got to mention is Kumail Nanjiani and Brian Tyree Henry. They both played Kingo and Phastos. Kingo is probably one of the funnier characters in this movie. He's probably the comedic relief. He's great. I really liked that film aspect from him, because in this world he is a Bollywood actor, and I really liked his scenes. He's funny when there needs to be a joke, and he's also really cool as well. And Phastos, I really enjoyed him. even though we don't see as much of him in this movie like some other characters. So yeah, I really liked him as well. Each of these Eternals have very unique set of abilities, and that helps you distinguish them from each other, just like how Icarus is sort of like Superman, and then you have Lauren Ridloff's Makari, sort of like the Flash, and you got Fina, who's like the Wonder Woman of the Eternals. You have a lot of really unique set of Eternals with different sets of abilities, and it helps you, again, distinguish them from one another, and it gives them all something very interesting about each of these characters. Another really good actor in this movie was Barry Keoghan. He played, if I pronounce that correctly, he played Druig. I really enjoyed him. I liked his dynamic with some of these characters as well. He's one of the more interesting characters in this movie, especially for his set of abilities and his relationship with these characters and what happens with him. I really dug it. He's really great. There are some really cool scenes that come from him, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him in The Batman next spring. So yeah, he did a really good job in this movie. Really dug him. And then there is Lia, who played Sprite. And I also thought she was also an interesting one as well, because I liked her scenes with Cersei and even with Icarus and just all that. And I thought she's an interesting character because you can tell for sure, like, she's a much younger Eternal, well, probably because of how the character looks. And I thought she had great moments with the characters. I really liked her. And all in all, again, really good casting on that part. She did great, especially with the scenes in this movie. And Lauren Ridloff, she was on Walking Dead, I think these recent seasons, if I'm not mistaken, and she was awesome as Makari. And with the screen time she had, I really liked seeing her and use her super speed. She was awesome. She was so cool. And even the visuals on her as she does her thing is very well done. And then Don Lee, like I mentioned before, is great as Gilgamesh. I loved his scenes with Angelina Jolie's Thena. They have this friendship bond, and it's really nice to see. And how you see he's also a really good fighter and a good warrior. And I just love their scenes. It's very heartwarming with one another, and there's some fun moments to be had with Gilgamesh and some of the other characters in this movie. And last but not least, Kit Harington. So he doesn't appear in this movie as much, actually, but I thought he had some nice moments with Cersei, and it was really cool to see him reunite in the same movie with Richard Madden, because both of them were on Game of Thrones. And so I thought from what he had, I really liked what I saw of Kit Harington, and I'm really curious to see what they're going to do with him after this movie. And yeah, so far the acting is a highlight. They did pick really good actors for this movie, and it paid off. The score by Ramin Djawadi is fantastic. He did the scores for Game of Thrones and even the very first Iron Man movie, and his score for Eternals is awesome. It had a lot of great tracks from the movie, especially in the third act. You get some of those Game of Thrones similar theme vibes from Eternals, and it's great. It feels very cinematic, and it fits this kind of grand MCU movie on the cosmic side of things. And he was a great pick, and I'm really happy we got to see him compose a score for the MCU again. And if you loved his Game of Thrones scores, you're gonna like what we hear from Eternals. Another positive I want to point out is this is a very unique kind of MCU movie. It's very different. Some of those MCU stuff is still there, but it feels so different. The way it's shot, I remember watching it, and midway through, I was like, I totally forgot this is a Marvel movie. It feels so different, and it was a risk for sure, especially with the divisive reception it's getting. And I really liked how they just went with it, and this feels so much like a Chloé Zhao movie, aside from some of those MCU stuff that came in there, like the humor. And so it's a really good-looking movie, and it feels so different, especially with the third act. And if you weren't a fan of how Shang-Chi's third act starts to feel more like your average MCU third act, Eternals could win you over. It's not quite as crazy and CGI and all that, but it was cool. And I liked how, and because it's very different in terms of story idea and structure, it does come off as a very different MCU movie compared to those. So Eternals is definitely a very unique MCU movie, and it was an interesting one at that. The action sequences in this movie are awesome. Granted, they're not as much action sequences in this movie because it is actually a much more character-driven movie, but when we do have action sequences, they're awesome because they're shot well, the visuals look fantastic, and the score in the background is really great when we have it, and just because the characters are so cool when they're in action and just the actors do such a good job with that, it makes the action sequences look really good. But what also makes it a lot better is because a lot of this movie is so practical and that they did this on location. It makes it a lot better because then you can tell they actually did this. It feels real and it doesn't feel anything like you can tell this is CG or something. No, it feels so real. And I could fully buy like, yeah, this is like actually happening because they did this on set practically. And it was so good. Everybody brought their A game for these sequences and they are just so cool to watch on the big screen. Chloé Zhao was the best person to direct this movie, but despite some of the MCU-isms throughout, this felt mostly like her movie and I like it. However, this movie also let me down in a few ways. I was, of course, really anticipating it, and in a few ways, it kind of disappointed me in a few ways. Not tremendously, but it didn't quite reach the expectations I had for it. Right, not, endgame level anticipation, but it did quite surprise me on some fronts, and I'm going to get into my issues with this movie. The first thing that comes to mind is the story structure. The story structure for this movie was messy because at one point you start with a flashback and then it cuts to modern day. And then it jumps over so much of like the stuff that happens in the opening that when you learn about these characters over the course of the movie, it's just flashback, present day, back to flashback again for another 5 to 10 minutes, and then back to present day. And when it does that, it just makes it like, wait, are we at a flashback? Because there were times where I was like forgetting. I was like, wait, is this a flashback? And then it's revealed it is. And the story structure for this is, this is what epic grand scale movies do for the most part. But with Eternals, at times it feels very jarring because it's like, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, you're following this story and it's not quite consistent and coherent with one another all that great. And that really surprised me because visually and acting wise and directing wise, it's a very well made movie. But the story structure for Eternals is really not that great. And I think from a story structure perspective, it had one of my middle to least favorite story structures in the entire MCU. The second issue I have with this movie is the character development. And this also adds to my story structure issue because of how it's structured. You have characters that appear so much, and then you have characters who don't appear all that often. And it's harder for me because the movie, I just couldn't really care for most of these characters at some points in the movie, especially in those first 2 acts of the movie, because things are happening to these characters in like literally the first 45 minutes of the movie. And I couldn't feel anything because I don't know much about these characters to really develop a connection. And when this stuff happens, I sit there and it's just like, I have a blank face. I just don't know if I can't really feel anything because I don't know much about this character. And it's a shame because this is a really tricky thing though as well, because this is a movie with a new team of characters and it's 2 hours and 37 minutes. So when you have all of these different characters you have to introduce for the first time, you have to develop them. That is a tough feat. But in some ways that did not quite live up to its potential because there were characters where it's like things are happening to them, they're in danger, or something bad is happening, I should feel bad, or I should be scared, but I don't feel it because I couldn't connect with them, and that is also an issue tremendously. When I watched Shang-Chi, I connected with Shang-Chi. I connected with his character because it's structured well, and they told they told me the stuff I needed to for me to really develop a connection with him. I couldn't really develop a connection with most of these Eternals until either the third act or just not at all. And it really let me down because you have a great set of actors and you have interesting characters that I couldn't really invest myself into all that much. The closest characters to do that for me are Cersei and Icarus, because those two are the leading Eternal characters of the 10. And so because they got the most screen time, I got the most reaction out of those two. But when it focused on anyone else in the movie, I couldn't really get myself invested because I don't know much about this person. And adding to that with the story structure, some characters are in there a lot, like Cersei and Icarus, and some characters are not in there all that much. And speaking on those characters, which I will not name, whenever they appear, they'll appear in the opening. And then some of them you don't see unless it's a flashback, or you don't see them until nearly the third act of this movie. And some of them don't even appear in the third act of this movie. And they just show up at random points throughout the movie once you get past the opening sequence. And when they're introduced, it's, okay, gotta find this Eternal, flashback that lasts for like 5 to 10 minutes, back to present day. And it's like, it does that so much for all these different characters that it's like, it's halting the story because it's like they're doing this structure and I don't think it's structured very well, and it makes the character development a whole lot weak. But then it also adds to my third issue, where even the emotional moments didn't quite land for me, because there are deaths in this movie, like in every other MCU movie, but when they happen, I don't feel anything. I legit remember a specific character gets killed off, and I sat there and I literally sat there with a blank face. I had no emotion because I didn't know anything about this character before it happened. And so it was like, I'm not feeling anything. So it's just so interesting to me how it's structured. A lot of those issues come to the really messy structure, and I think that could have been done a whole lot better. Especially the character development should have been stronger for me to really feel invested in these characters, and it would have made the emotional moments a whole lot better. And then my fourth issue with this movie is a lot more of the humor. There are humor moments that work, and then there's humor where it fell flat for me. And there's some jokes from time to time where it happens, I'm not really laughing because it ruins the moment, or it's just not needed. And then there are some jokes in this movie that work very well, and they actually work, especially from Kumail Nanjiani and Brian Tyree Henry's Fastos, who are the two most humorous characters in the movie. Whenever they have a joke, they make the most jokes, and for the most part, some of it lands, some of it does not. It's one of my issues with Shang-Chi as well. And this is one of the things where I think Eternals sort of has some of those average MCU mannerisms when it comes to humor. And I think Eternals sort of suffers from that as well, because the humor at times works, and then at other times not so much. And then my fifth issue, this isn't as big of an issue as everything the other things I've listed, but when I was watching this in IMAX, there were certain moments where there's an IMAX shot. It covers up the whole screen, whether it's a landscape shot or if it's of a celestial or if it's in an action sequence. And then right after that shot, it cuts to a more regular shot of like a bunch of characters where you'll have the black bars on top and bottom. And then it reverts to IMAX again. And it happens in the opening. It happens almost every action sequence. And I wonder why. Like, I get IMAX cameras are expensive, but I don't know why it constantly has to revert from IMAX format, regular format, and then next shot back to IMAX again, and then for another 2 scenes, and then it's back to a normal format. I don't know why it does that. At times, it kind of doesn't let me live in for the moment because it constantly changes formatting for the shots, and it's a mixed bag for me because some of these shots look fantastic in IMAX, and a part of me doesn't know why they had to make some of them go back to that normal format, really right in between two IMAX shots. I don't know why it happened. It happens quite a bit, and it holds the movie back for me, even though it doesn't undermine the fact that it is the best looking MCU movie. And then last but not least, the movie at times has so much story, and the mythology is interesting, and the ideas are great. But again, because the structure is messy, that it at times feels like this movie should have been longer, but then at other times it feels like it needs to be shorter. But then it's also harder because it feels like this is literally a story that's worth a 2-part movie series for, where this literally should have been a 2-part movie, or it should have been a Disney Plus miniseries, because there was so many characters and so much lore to develop and to build off of for this movie, that there was simply too much of it in this movie. And there are times where it drags, even though I was never bored by it, because that is a common complaint. I wasn't bored by Eternals one bit. I was engaged no matter what was happening. But because of the story being so big and so grand, especially for one movie, it made me feel like, at one hand, the movie should be longer, but then other times it feels like it needs to be a lot shorter, because the middle act at times feels the longest. And because of all that, I think the character development also needed more work. So on one hand, it's like it needs to be nearly 3 hours, maybe even 3.5 hours at that. And even as a Disney Plus show, where each character gets their time to shine and gets development that they need for me to invest in these characters. And because of that, it's like, at times it just makes the story, it makes the structure a lot worse, and it just makes it harder for me to really kind of understand, is the pacing going well or not, and should the story have really be told in just one movie. And then last but not least, the end credit scenes, not a negative. They're cool. I enjoyed them. They didn't get a lot of reaction from me like the end credit scenes for Shang-Chi, especially that first one. So it's cool. If you're a fan of a specific celebrity, I will not say who for the fun of it, you might enjoy the end credit scenes for Eternals. For me, I thought, okay, that's cool. The character they brought in is cool, even though I don't know too much about this character, but it was fine. So when it comes to end credit scenes, I think MCU fans, like, definitely stay for it. Of course, obviously, why wouldn't you? But with the end credit scenes, I think they're cool. They're good. I don't think they're the best they've ever put out for the MCU, but they're fine. Definitely stay for it, especially for 2 specific characters that they pretty much introduced through them. So definitely stay for that. To sum things up, Eternals is a movie that I liked, but I didn't love it like I hoped I would. It had great acting, fantastic visual effects, and some really cool action sequences, but a messy story structure. I'm a little bit torn on what letter grade I'm going to give Eternals, but in the end, I'm going to give Eternals a B. And if you are an MCU fan, I definitely think this is worth checking out in the theaters and make your own opinion on it. Now it's time for my Phase 4 movie ranking of the 3 movies thus far. In last place is Black Widow. This movie used to be at an A- in my review, but I would now give it a B. In second place is Eternals. And in first place at the moment is none other than Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Those are my thoughts on Eternals. What did you guys think about this movie? Let me know down below in the comments section. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Where do you stand on the divisiveness? Do you really like it, or were you a little bit disappointed by it? I'd love to hear you guys down below in the comments section. And thank you guys so much for watching. And don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button, and stay tuned for more.